Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting. We're going to continue reviewing these state test review questions so that when you get to that test at the end of the year, you knock it out of the park. So teacher, if you could, why don't you go ahead and pass out this worksheet. Y'all take 15-20 minutes to work on this. When you're ready for the answers, come back to me, unpause the video, and we'll do the questions on the board behind me. All right. I'm sure that didn't give y'all any problem, but just in case it did, try your best to follow along and we're going to clear up any confusion. So let's go ahead and get the ball rolling on this. So this first one says, the chart below and the incomplete cladogram show the relatedness of 5 organisms. You want to take a second and read over that chart. It has a lot of important information there for you. The question says, select the 2 statements that best describe the cladogram. For this one, the 2 answer choices that I like are A and D. And let's double check to make sure that these make sense. So A says the trait that separates salmon from the other organisms, 1, is the development of lungs. So let's say we put lungs right here at 1. How you kind of read these is everything to the left of this does not have that trait, and everything to the right would have that trait. And so if you know anything about salmon, fish do not have lungs. So that's correct. All these other organisms do. The salamander does, the lizard does, the hamster does, and the chimpanzee all have lungs. So that one is placed correctly. Let's look at letter D. The trait that separates lizards from hamsters is the presence of fur and mammary glands. So again, how this works, if we put fur and mammary glands right here at number 3, we just want to ask ourselves, everything to the left of 3 does not have hair and mammary glands, and everything to the right would. Hamsters and chimpanzees do have fur and mammary glands. So these 2 are going to be the correct answer for that one. Great work. Let's move on to the next one. All right, this says, before the formation of the Grand Canyon many years ago, a single species of squirrel lived in that area. As the canyon developed, the single species was separated into 2 habitats, 1 species on either side of the 10-mile wide and 1-mile deep canyon. Evidence also indicates that humans have inhabited these areas in recent years. Which set of statements most likely describe how the formation of the Grand Canyon affected the single squirrel species that once populated the area? The best answer for this one is C. What's happening here is a process known as speciation. What is speciation? Speciation is making a new species. We started with 1 species of squirrel, but now we have 2. These are not the same species anymore. They could not mate and make fertile offspring. Okay, they are their own species. So we have made a new species here. How did that happen? Well, the single species that was split into 2 distinctive groups by the canyon, with each group adapting to its unique environment. So these squirrels are in different habitats. They evolved to fit that habitat a little bit better. And today, so many years later, they're not even similar enough to be considered the same species. They couldn't mate and make fertile offspring. So they are 2 different species now, and that is known as speciation. Great work. Let's go on. This says, a group of researchers performed an investigation in which they grew 2 species of microscopic aquatic organisms called paramecium in test tubes. The researchers found that both species grew better alone. When grown together, the growth of one species, A, declined, and the growth of the other species, B, increased until it reached capacity. Which statement best describes what would likely happen to these species if they were grown in a lake instead of a test tube? Okay, the answer that I really like for this one is C. It says, over time, species B would survive and pass on its traits to future offspring. Okay, that's the correct answer here. That's what's going to happen in an environment. The species that lives and continues to reproduce gets to pass on its genetics to the next generation. And that's what's going to happen here if it were left to its own devices out in that lake instead of a test tube. Okay, great work. Let's move on to the next one. This says the evolution of eukaryotic cells is explained by the endosymbiotic theory. Write the numbers of each image of the correct box to show the sequence of evolution of eukaryotic cells. So it's telling us where we're ending. You can see that step 5, this is the cell today. It has a nucleus and mitochondria and chloroplast. It wants us to put these in order on how we got there. Here's what I think the correct order is. I think we should go 3, 1, 4, 2. And if you look at this, this is going to line up and make this picture pretty correct. Okay, so the first one is 3. This is our cell. It has no chloroplast, it has no mitochondria, it's just a nucleus. The endosymbiotic theory tells us that we took in a mitochondria and we took in a chloroplast because it was kind of a win-win situation. So we started at 3. 1 is the next one. You can kind of see us bringing in this little organelle here, okay? And then in 4, it's fully, here it was kind of moving into us. Now it's fully incorporated into the cell, okay? And then the last step was 2. You can see that this mitochondria is kind of trying to make its way into the cell. And then in step 5, it is fully incorporated. So that is the correct answer of how this happened, okay? Great work, and let's move on to the next one. This says, the fossil record contains evidence of physical changes in horses over time. The diagram shows some of the changes in horse height and number of toes per forefoot as observed in the fossil record. Part A is asking us to circle a word or phrase in each set of parentheses to best describe the changes observed in horse height and number of toes per forefoot over time. Okay, compared to Hyrocorthemium, the height of modern horses has increased. You can see that the horse is taller now, right? Okay, and the number of toes has decreased. Look over here. We started with these 4 toes, right? And now up here we only have 1. So the horse is getting, over time, the horse is getting taller and it's getting less toes. Okay, it says, using the evidence shown, record the number to identify the toe that likely had the most impact on the evolution of the forefoot in horses. What we really want to see here, the correct answer is 3. What's going on here? Look at this third, the bone being labeled 3rd here. You can see that as time goes on, it's getting bigger and bigger, right? And then eventually, you can see here that we are losing some of the other toes, but that bone labeled 3 is sticking around until the very end, where that's the only one left. Now, modern horses only has that 1 toe, and so that probably played the biggest impact on the evolution of these organisms. Great work. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, a cladiogram shows the relationship of organisms without being an evolutionary tree of how a specific group of organisms has changed over time. The diagram below is a cladiogram with one organism placed in their proper location. Record the letter of each remaining organism in its best location in the cladiogram to demonstrate how the organisms are related. And again, we want to use these traits down here. How you read this is everything to the left of this trait would not have this trait, and everything to the right does have that trait. So what's the correct order for this one? Well, I think we should go like this. C, D, B, A. And let's just double check that this is kind of making sense. So at this line, this is saying that we put the insects there. Well, the next trait after the insects is vertebrates. And remember, we're saying that everything to the left of this would not have that trait. Well, insects are not vertebrates, and so that is going to track, and that makes sense. Okay, the next one, D, we put there as fish. And you can see that the fish is a vertebrate, but it does not have 4 legs. So that's the perfect place to put it. The next one we put was B as the amphibians. The amphibian has 4 legs, but it doesn't have an amniotic egg. An amniotic egg usually has like a hard shell and an amniota membrane on the inside of it. Reptiles or amphibians don't have that. And then the last one is letter A. We have this kind of lemur-looking creature, and you can see that that one does have hair, while none of the other organisms do. Okay, so that's the correct answer for this one. Let's move on to the next question. This says, use the scenario to answer the next 2 questions. It's some information about an organism known as Rice's whale. For years, scientists have studied a relatively small group of baleen whales in the Gulf of Mexico. Thought to be a subspecies of bird's whale, the whale in the Gulf of Mexico showed several differences as listed below. These are some key differences that you really want to make sure you read over. That's the only way you're going to be able to answer these next questions. So let's look at what that question is really asking us. It says, which 3 types of data described in the scenario provide the best evidence to support the conclusion that Rice's whale represents a unique species? Okay, for this one, the 3 that I like are A, C, and D. Okay, it's saying the genetic code in between the whales were different, the anatomy and morphology between these two different species of whale was different, and the biogeographical distribution were different. And if you come back to this question or back to this description, you'll see that all of that is true. So it's saying that the whales in the Gulf of Mexico don't migrate. It's saying their DNA differs. And then lastly, it says their skeletal measurements differ between the whale groups. So these are three pieces of evidence that supports the idea that Rice's whale is not the same as that other species of whale. Okay, so that's the answer that I like for this one. Let's move on. This says, which statement explains the conditions that most likely led to the development of the Rice's whale species? For this one, I like C. Okay, it says a group of whales become geographically isolated, and over time, and through reduced gene flow, they develop genetic differences and establish distinct food preferences. This is kind of like that squirrel question that we were looking at earlier. Because these groups of whales aren't mixing with the other groups, they eventually speciate into a new species. Okay, great work. Let's keep it going. This one says, which two examples best illustrate the driving forces of natural selection for increased survival supporting Darwin's theory of evolution? Okay, a lot of these kind of make sense, but to me, I think the two that are the best answer choices here are C and D, and we'll talk about how these increase the survival odds for these different organisms. So C says sea turtles lay an average of 100 eggs in the nest approximately 3 to 7 times per nesting season. So these sea turtles lay a lot of eggs because when the eggs hatch, a lot of those turtles don't make it to the water. A lot of organisms prey on those turtles, and so they have to have a lot of them in the hopes that just a couple of them can make it to maturity. And then D says fox squirrel coats color ranges from a red-orange color variation to silver-gray color variation based on geography. So you can imagine if these organisms are in the desert, they want more of a red-orange color, but if they're in a snowy place where there's a lot of ice and snow, you would want that silver-gray, and that's going to help you hunt, but also going to keep you protected from things that are hunting you, right? Great, let's go on to the next one. So this says, use the scenario to answer the next two questions. Before the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain, birds fed primarily on dark-colored moths. The Industrial Revolution caused environmental changes. Coal fires caused dark soot to be released into the air. The soot was then deposited on trees, grasses, and buildings. This changes to the existing environment causes a change in the genetic frequency demonstratively by moths in Great Britain. Okay, the question here says, which graph best represents the genetic frequency of the dark-colored moths during the Industrial Revolution? Okay, the best answer here is C. Basically, we're getting a lot more of these dark-colored moths. Okay, and you can imagine, look at this dark-colored moth after the Industrial Revolution. Everything's covered in this black soot. These black moths are hiding really, really well during this time. Because they're hiding so well on the trees and everything else that's really dark and dark colored, the birds can't find them as easily, and instead they're eating all these light colored moths. As time goes on, the light colored moths keep getting eaten, the black colored moths make it and keep reproducing, and that means the population of these black colored moths start to skyrocket. And now today we see a lot more black colored moths than in the past. Okay, great work. This says, based on the information in the scenario, what caused the change in genetic frequency of the moths during the Industrial Revolution? Okay, so for this one, I like B, natural selection due to predation. Again, like I was saying earlier, because everything was covered in a black soot, the black colored moths were hiding really well. The birds couldn't see them against the black bark on the tree. Those white-colored moths were sticking out, they were easy to see, and that means the birds were able to eat them a lot easier. Okay, here's the last question for today, y'all. Thank you so much for following along with me. This says, the diagram shows an incomplete model of the evolution of heterotrophs and autotrophs. Record the letter of a description in each box to correctly complete the model. Okay, so for this one, here's the order that I like. I think we should go Y, Z, W, X, and let's just read over those to make sure that that's all making sense. So what's the first thing that happened in the evolution of heterotrophs and autotrophs? We put Y, well, that says the formation of inorganic molecules. We're going to need to have some building blocks for life before we actually make life itself. So the first thing we need are those inorganic molecules, okay? And then the next one is Z, the formation of organic molecules. So once we have some carbon and hydrogen and oxygen, now we've got the building blocks to make living things, and then at Z, we're actually making those organic molecules, so things that are alive, okay? Then we make basic living cells, okay? The next letter we went with was W, evolution of structures that use oxygen to break down sugar. So this is that cellular respiration. And then the last one is X, the evolution of structures that use light energy to form sugar. That's kind of that photosynthesis process, and then you can see that led to photosynthetic autotrophs. So y'all, thank you so much for following along with me today. Your teacher has some other work for you to do, so make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.